Good afternoon and welcome to the Housing and Economic Development Committee. We'll get started with roll call, posting of the agenda, and the flag salute.
Member Flynn.
Present.
Member Lopez.
Here.
Chair Madrigal.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum, and the agenda for this meeting was posted in the City Hall kiosk on Tuesday, February 18th.
Okay, thank you very much. Please stand for the flag salute. Council Member Lopez, do you mind leading?
Please join the flag salute. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. It looks like we have no public comments this afternoon. Moving on, we have the consent agenda, the approval of minutes for the February 11th, 2020 meeting.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
And we'll just do all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 3-0. Moving on to reports by the Community Development Department and the City of Oxnard's Climate Action Plan.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. I'm Kathleen Mallory. I'm the Planning and Sustainability Manager, and this afternoon we have a presentation on the city's Climate Action Plan. Oops, there we are. The common question, what is a climate action plan? The climate action plan establishes sustainability goals and measures and metrics for how the city can meet those mandates, the sustainability mandates. Many of them are specified in state law and require updates and studies to help demonstrate how you'll meet those greenhouse gas reduction measures, for example. It identifies the way that the community as well as the city can respond to the mandates as mentioned, and then it actually goes through and identifies challenges and opportunities and lays out trade-offs and choices to be made for pursuing those climate policy improvements or greenhouse gas reduction goals. It will also help serve as a mechanism for the city to develop sustainability initiatives and strategies, and it will help prioritize those strategies. It will demonstrate how the city can adapt and improve in resilience to deal with future climate hazards and resilience, flooding, storm events, heat events, and drought, for example. And then it'll address policies to it'll create policies, to address disadvantaged communities, and that would be how the city could respond to rising costs for energy, for example, or how do you protect for greenhouse gas impacts that may negatively impact certain communities and segments of the city. It'll then also outline wider social, environmental, economic benefits due to implementation and improve the distribution of the benefits throughout the city's population, really looking at greenhouse gas and where those impacts are in the community and how to improve some of the emission impacts to various areas of the city. So this visually shows what is a it's actually climate action, which includes adaptation, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But really, climate change, it's evaluated in a variety of areas. So climate change impacts, land use, transportation, and planning. It impacts, climate change is a direct derivative of energy and production and consumption, and that's both at the city and the community level. And that means city, like city municipal buildings, and then the community in terms of different land uses within the city. And then also climate change is impacted in other sectors of the city and community, for example, water, wastewater, solid waste, agricultural uses. So those are kind of the higher level where you see climate change being addressed and how climate change can be impacted in some of those policy documents. For example, some of the Senate bills identify ways to reduce greenhouse gas through different land use decisions, for example, or standards for how you measure movement of vehicles on your roadways. And then more granularity, the impacts to climate change is seen in how your transit, your fleet. It's seen in your infrastructure choices you make, for example, renewable vehicles in your fleet. It's seen in terms of the types of standards you impose for development projects with construction. It just goes on and on. EV is electric vehicle fleet. And really, when we look at climate change, we know that how you plan for your communities and how you identify your land uses and where you put different land uses has a direct impact upon how far you drive, and that has a corresponding impact with greenhouse gases. It's important to note when we think about energy, and energy comes in many forms from both natural gas, electricity, and then alternative fuels as well. Let me go back. There we go, going forward. And this, I thought, I really like this slide for a variety of reasons. As we've already established, climate change and adaptation is addressed in many of those middle areas that we're talking about. I'm sorry, the top layers, land use, transportation, ag, wastewater, water. But in all those different areas where we're looking at climate change and sustainability, those provisions, when you look at how your city is going to be developing over the long term, there are ways that you can adapt different land use patterns and different types of uses in your city. You can adapt to climate changes by, I'm still learning this here we go, by identifying different adaptation strategies. So through changes in your water supply, movement of water results in energy that results in greenhouse gases. So, for example, or adaptation in terms of how you deal with storm and wind events, like how do you protect your coastal areas to address adaptation for storm surge events, public safety, for example, energy usage, and what do you do when you don't have sufficient energy or you have mandatory power shutoffs. And then again on public infrastructure, what type of infrastructure should we have? Should it be all renewable? Should it be a blend? So this is what we're going to be looking at through this climate action plan, is adaptation measures and then corresponding mitigation to address impacts as a result of greenhouse gas emissions and reduction targets. And many of those targets are established by state law that we'll have to then prove through our document how we're meeting those standards. I am still getting used to that. There we go. Okay, so just to give you some context, that's what a climate action plan is, and it includes adaptation and resilience measures. Where we started was back in January, Council of 2019. Council approved the appropriation of $350,000 for the city's climate action plan. And as we've talked about, the CAP will establish the framework for how we'll reduce greenhouse gas emissions over the next 30 to 40 years, and how we'll deal with climate change on a broader standpoint, on a broader framework, to address public health issues, infrastructure, and impacts to ecosystems. The CAP will feature also, and we're excited about this, health equity and climate justice component, and that's consistent with our sustainability policies within our general plan, Chapter 2. There are some granular, very high-level policies. We'll take those policies and then implement them through the CAP to deal with health equity, social equity, climate justice issues. We distributed a request for proposals in October of 2019. We received 5 bids. The committee, a city committee, unanimously recommended ESA, who's one of the leaders in the climate field. They gave some great example documents that they had done. The city of Richmond was a very similar community to what we have here. We're very impressed with their documents and the way that they're dealing with climate change throughout California. And we're recommending a total contract amount of $411,490. As mentioned, the $350,000 was previously appropriated. We have additional optional elements or optional tasks, roughly $62,000, which we may not use. We may choose not to utilize for the general plan maintenance fee, utilize those funds to pay for those additional optional elements. We have applied for grant funding to make up that difference, but we wanted to have that opportunity to potentially use ESA for those tasks. So that's the reason why we're asking for an appropriation of the additional $62,000. I will also mention that when we started looking further and at the scope and working through some of the community outreach elements, we're recommending the inclusion of another optional task, which is community engagement and additional community engagement and community outreach. So the $62,000 would include 4 optional elements. And if we're able to secure that grant funding, we would shift some of the money around and use some of that money as well for additional community outreach. The scope before you right now for the $350,000 has good community outreach, has robust community meetings. We're thinking through the process. We're hoping that we are going to get more engagement from the community, and so we'd like to have that option to do even more additional outreach beyond the 5 that we have scoped thus far. As I mentioned on the CAP scope, it includes, it'll look at the vulnerable areas of the city where there's impacts to climate, and it's not just sea level rise, it's drought, it's the temperature impacts. I mean, those are real issues that are facing communities in terms of heat islands, and what do you do for your vulnerable populations in terms of where they go. We'll look at rain events and fire risk as well, which we all know has been a big issue. And then we'll come up with a set of adaptation strategies as ways to change and reduce those risks. And those will be policy documents that then will lead to implementation through code standards. And importantly, we really see this as a beginning point to a kickoff to our 2045 general plan update. The work that we'll be doing with the CAP will help set the framework and the background data for the 2040 general plan update. I think we've talked already about how the CAP will look at greenhouse gas inventory and quantification. You may not know, but we have a 2013 Energy Action Plan. The CAP document will update that document, and it'll look at all the different sectors in the city to know how those different land use categories are impacting our greenhouse gas emissions, which we find that'll be a really good tool towards land use planning down the road as part of our general plan update. And then, as I mentioned, we have 5 community outreach and facilitation meetings. We're going to have some brand identification. We'll have our project website and social media announcements, and we're really intending for this to be a real web-based outreach effort. The implementation measures will demonstrate how doing specific tasks will reduce our greenhouse gas impacts and our climate impacts over a series of time. And then one of the requirements is that we want for our CAP to review the environmental impacts of some of those changes to our policies and our standards, and then when we go through reviewing development projects, if we find that they're in compliance with those standards, then we can indicate that the project is exempt from CEQA energy analysis. The California Environmental Quality Act has a new provision that you have to analyze the greenhouse gas impacts of a development project. Unless you have that document that quantifies the impact, it's very difficult to do that in a defensible way. So this document will do that for us. We've already talked about the optional elements that we have in. We have 3 that will help move forward the analysis, and we're recommending the addition of that one more, which would be a bit more community outreach. Staff's recommendation is that the Housing and Economic Development Committee recommend council approval of the ESA contract for the Climate Action Plan in the amount of $411,490, which includes also the appropriation of $90,000 for the General Plan Maintenance Fund for the contract with ESA for the optional tasks, as well as staff's related time. ESA's was 62, and the addition to 90 is roughly additional time that staff would need working on this project and would draw from that appropriation. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you very much. It looks like we have no public speakers with that. Mayor Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the presentation. Quick question about the CAP. It's going to help us prepare for the 2045 general plan. We now have a 2030 general plan. So how, from a sequencing standpoint, when do we begin to implement the results of the plan?
The CAP will take 2 years, roughly, to complete. So at the end of that 2-year time frame, we could begin implementing those provisions. And we envision our general plan update efforts will start in about 1.5 years.
And is this fulfilling a state requirement, state legislation, to make sure that, consistent with California's somewhat unique approach to climate change and global warming and everything, is this required that every municipality, including county governments, that they have a climate action plan as an inherent part of their general plan, or is that something that cities voluntarily and or counties can do?
There are specific requirements that require cities to look at strategies to reduce greenhouse gas mandates, greenhouse gas impacts. There's also a specific requirement that your safety element has to look at flooding, wildlands in urban areas, and geologic hazards. So there are standards and mandates by the state that we have to address, and many jurisdictions are choosing to address those requirements within a climate action plan, as well as an update to our safety element. And I will mention that the items that we're covering in our CAP, we will use that information to update our safety element of our general plan.
And I guess just more specifically, and final question is actually, I mean, have we here, maybe you or the planning staff, have we named it a climate action plan, or is it something that is a choice that cities can say, okay, we're going to do a climate action plan and we're going to incorporate our strategies, as you mentioned, on reducing greenhouse gases in that regard? Does the state, in other words, give us an option to not do a climate action plan? I'm just wondering what our options are. I mean, it's $411,000, and then the appropriation from the General Plan Maintenance Fund. Is there an actual alternative to this?
There's not really an alternative to this. I mean, a climate action plan looks at greenhouse gas impacts and all the other areas I've mentioned to address the overall climate concerns. We've not seen it, I've not seen it referred to anything but a climate action plan. So we've actually stepped out a little bit and called it a climate action and adaptation plan, because we do envision that our document will look very heavily at adaptation efforts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Lopez.
Thank you. This is, I think this is a, surprise that we don't have more people here, providing some feedback on this, because I think it's a very valuable process that we're going to go through in the next 2 years. And it's helpful to understand how long, that this is a very informative process. So you mentioned that it will take 2 years to go through the process of creating this plan. And through the presentation, you mentioned that this will bring about some changes to like city code and that sort of thing. So are these the types of changes that we'll see within the 2 years, or is that part of the implementation at the end of the 2 years? Or what changes can we see within the next 2 years?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember. That's an excellent question. The overall document, which will establish the policies and the standards and the ways and implementation measures for how we get to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the document will have an implementation schedule. Excuse me, and that schedule will set out priorities and lay out, where do we want to start first. So we won't see ordinances from this cap, but we will have a set of priorities, and we'll have a series of implementation measures for what we want to accomplish first, second, and so on.
Okay, thank you. And I think kind of a follow-up to the mayor's question about this being the kind of a starting point to the 2045 general plan. So can we expect that the cap will be incorporated into the general plan? And when will be the next time that this will be revised, or can we expect that as just being part of the general plan moving forward after that?
Right. That's again, Councilmember, excellent question. The cap will be folded into elements of the general plan, and the cap will help drive decisions with land use and recommendations for principally land use and code standards and code changes to secure better reductions. Caps are typically updated every 5 years. The general plan update process we will envision will take 3.5 years. So we will fold in key policy elements from the cap into the general plan update. Our cap will be a component of it, but we know that towards the end of our general plan update process, we may need to do a little refresh of some of the climate quantification and maybe possibly refine or tweaking some of the policies to align with some of the general plan update work that we do.
And another question, so this is kind of informed by some state law and executive orders. So if there's new laws that are coming through, is that is that part of the process and the project that those will also be incorporated along the way, or do we need to come back for any amendments?
Again, our document will be addressing the current executive order standards for reductions, and those have different benchmarks. So certainly we'll keep our eye on that, and we don't envision those standards for reduction targets to change in the next 5 years, but it's likely right about the time we come in for another update and refresh on the cap, we'll be certainly looking at those standards, and we may need to tweak and change some of those policies to get to further reductions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I do want to definitely highlight that, appreciate that it will be a multilingual, multicultural process that I think is very welcome and appreciated by the community. So thank you for the information and your answers to my questions. Sure.
Thank you. Kind of my concerns were along the lines of the mayor, and most, if not all, those questions were answered. This is going to be a very important item in our future. However, this is something that we'll work on as a city. However, I know that actions by the county or even the state directly affect us, and it's kind of hard. I get staff's position on this, but it is really difficult to do something and then it be superseded by either the county or by the state. How is it that we are going to be able to work on an action plan and then, measures are changed by the state, and, sometimes state changes things, but then the city's responsible for the economic impact of it. So how do we go about that? Or is it still going to be, we're at the mercy of the state? They say, do this, and realistically there's no money there, so it comes out of the city's pocket.
Sure, Chair. So first, the state does establish the standards for reduction targets, just like Southern California Edison has certain renewable standards that are established by the PUC. So looking at it at a higher level, there are the state standards that we'll have to comply with. So that there is that, and there's no way around that. We do continue to be involved in legislation through our legislative platform. We continue to keep our eyes on that. So when we see legislation that is going haywire or directly in conflict with our mission and our platform, we do provide those letters and hope to sway the legislation the way that we think is best for our community. when the state comes in and gives mandates, they don't tell you precisely what you have to do. They just give you a target. So that's up to us to establish how we want to get to, as we say it, to our reduction targets. So there is a whole host of options that we will be able to choose for our community for how we want to secure reductions. And then finally, with the county, we are actively involved in reviewing the county's draft climate action plan, and their policies won't dictate ours. There are collaborative policies that the county's CAP, which is currently out for public review, that the county's CAP contains, and I would envision that we would include similar language for coordinated adaptation efforts. Obviously, our coast doesn't stop right at our borders, so we will continue to be involved in the county's CAP process, but they won't dictate what we do.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and looks like we need a motion, or we're good?
Move the recommended item. It's to give it to the send it to the city council. So move the recommended item.
Second.
Should call for a vote, or should we do roll call?
If you want to just do all in favor, you can.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Will anyone disagree? No? Okay. 3-0. Thank you very much. Moving on, items for future agenda. Mayor?
Nothing on my end.
Actually, I do have something. I know this isn't directly for Housing and Economic Development Committee. However, I do have what the guidelines are for parking for businesses in the city of Oxnard, because I've seen some local restaurants that have taken away parking spots, and I don't even know if they ever got the city's permission.
So is the request for what they are in different parts of the city and the parking requirements are more similar to, I think we had a gentleman maybe at the the last council meeting that had a concern about industrial parking standards.
Well,
is your
that's-
request kind of for the different areas?
Different areas, business as well, simply because I know it's not industrial, but I know that depending on where you're at, parking is a little different. I don't know if that's the city's doing or the businesses do as they please.
The scope of the report that you want brought here, though, is it a summary, or do you want to talk offline about some specific areas that you have concerns to kind of inform the item that would be coming to the committee?
Well, we come to committee, so that's fine.
Okay.
All right, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.